This episode of Warbird Tube is brought to you in part by Aviation Discovery Fest. Celebrate the spirit of freedom as Aviation Discovery Fest returns to Dallas October 4th through the 6th. Experience world-changing vintage aircraft and military vehicles. See living history with authentic reenactors and pay honor to the veterans of the greatest generation. Plus, you can take flight with living history flight experiences. Be sure and get your tickets today at aviationdiscoveryfest.org.
Hey everybody, welcome to CAF Warbird Tube, the show where we talk about World War II, aviation, history, and so much more. Warbird Tube is produced by the Commemorative Air Force, the world's largest flying museum. Our mission is to educate, inspire, and honor through flight and living history experiences. The CAF began the Warbird movement more than 65 years ago, and thanks to the support of individuals like you, we continue to grow strong. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and now our host, Steve Buss. Thanks for watching and keep 'em flying.
Good evening. Welcome to CAF Warbird Tube. This is episode number 173 of Warbird Tube. And tonight, Victoria Yeager will join us, and she's going to talk about her new book, Chuck Yeager, What a Ride. And of course, she is Chuck Yeager's favorite co-pilot. We'll find out more about that in just a minute. But before we get started, please do us a favor. If you haven't already done so, and I know many of you have, and thank you, to take just a second to like, share, and subscribe, and make sure you follow us. If you are subscribing on YouTube, click that bell icon. You'll get a notification when our new episodes of Warbird Tube go live. All right. Now, Warbird Tube is made possible by the Commemorative Air Force. To find out more about the CIF, our events, aircraft, local units, or how you can join the fun, just visit our website at commemorativeairforce.org. Now, as you're watching tonight, if you have some questions, just type those in the chat box, and we'll try to answer them either during the presentation as we're talking, or we'll make sure we save some time at the end before we sign off and answer any questions you might have. So joining us right now, Victoria Yeager. Victoria, great to see you once again, and congratulations on the new book.
Thank you, Steve. It's always great to see you. Appreciate it.
Well, now this book, we talked about your first book, the Chuck Yeagerisms,
yeah, 101.
About a year ago, right? But this is a different book, completely different, because this is more personal stories of your years together with General Yeager. I mean, what was kind of the idea behind sharing some of these stories? Some of them are very personal, but what sort of was the impetus for making this happen?
Well, what happened was I started a blog after I met Chuck. And so I had these stories, and thank goodness I did, because when I started putting this book together, there were details I'd forgotten about. And you're absolutely right. It was so personal, I almost didn't publish it. And actually, there were 1,200 pages. I had to get it down to under 400 to make, if anybody would actually pick up that book. So it was really fun, and it's kind of fun to go back. Chuck used to read his book, Yeager, an autobiography, every now and again. Yeah. And he would read it kind of to remember some of the details of living life, but he enjoyed the memories. So it was fun to watch him reading his own book. And the first time when he met me, he gave me his book to read. So I had a heads up as to who he was. And and I'd be in a spot, and he'd say, "Where are you now?" And I'd say, "Well, I'm in this part." And then he'd tell me the whole story beyond the book. So it's pretty cool. But it is, you're right. You touched on it exactly. It's very, very personal. But I thought it was great to share it share my husband. He was a great man.
He certainly was. And of course, you start out the book with how you met. And that, I know that's a frequently asked question of you, but just give us maybe the condensed version of the encounter, because I think this is just a priceless story.
Well, you're talking to me. I don't know about condensed. I mean, you asked me what time it is. There goes Wednesday. But here we go. So I had a deal with a major network, or they were trying to do a deal, and they were already cheating me. So I thought, wait a minute, we haven't even started. And so I was trying to decide, do I want to do this deal, or do I stand up? What do I do? So I went out to my favorite spot to hike, where it was a beautiful March day, March flowers, the sun was shining, and I'm walking up this hill. Nobody's ever on that spot. And here comes this man older man coming down, and it was like a halo behind his head. And I said, "Hey, great dad." And he said, "I just got back from Australia." And I said, "Well, I just got back from Africa. What were you doing in Australia?" And he said, "I was teaching software guys." And I said, "Okay, I need a job. I was volunteering. I need to refill the coffers. Can you get me a job?" He said, "No, I'm not a software guy. I'm a fighter pilot. I'm Chuck Yeager." And I thought, Chuck Yeager, is that a common name in the military? Is he the Chuck? Wait, who was Chuck Yeager? And so I said, "Well, okay, you won't get me a job. You want to take me up in a fighter jet?" And he said, "No, that costs tens of thousands of taxpayer dollars." And I said, "Well, I pay taxes." And that's when he decided he wasn't so sure. So he said, I got to go. So he takes a couple of steps past me, and I said, wait, you won't get me a job. Won't take me in a fighter jet. You want to go hiking tomorrow? I just knew I wanted to know this guy. And he said, "It's 3 o'clock. He looks at his watch and he said, "That's my truck down there. It's got an X1 on it. You know what that is?" I said, "Oh God, I used to be so good at school." "No, what was it?" And he said, "Broke the Sunbird." I said, "Oh, that's right. That's you. I saw the movie." And he said, "What movie?" He still wasn't sure about me. I said, "The Right Stuff." And he goes, "All righty then." Takes a few more steps and he said, wait. And I said, "Okay, what now?" And he said, "I'm older than you. You can't go too fast." And I said, "Well, we're 50 feet from the start of the trail. You think I stopped to talk to you? I'm tired." And then the next day, he was actually unbelievably 4 minutes late. I was 20 minutes early, and every minute was like an hour. And I was thinking to myself, if he doesn't show up, he didn't have my number, couldn't cancel it, and what do I do? And if I call up his office, they're going to say, sure, But I thought, well, I won't waste the day. I'll at least walk around, and he'll go the other way, and we'll meet up again. Well, he shows up, and I go running across the road, and he gathers me up in this beautiful hug, and I just, he didn't let go for the next 20 years. So it was great. It was perfect. We went hiking, we went flying, and then we had dinner. And like you were talking the other day, I just kept pinching myself. This is a beautiful flight, and that's Chuck Yeager in front of me.
Yeah.
It was fantastic.
And quite an awesome way to meet him, because I know throughout his career, he met a lot of people who were, I don't want to say hero worshipers, but they were trying to get close to him because of who he was and his fame. But there was a much deeper person behind that "I broke the sound barrier" thing. There was a very complicated individual who was very talented in many, many different ways, and some things that folks may not know about. And I think through this book can kind of get a better sense of who he was. That he's not just a one-dimensional character. He's a larger-than-life modern-day hero.
Steve, he had an intellectual curiosity that wouldn't quit, and that's what kept him young. I mean, this one guy who butchered his elk said that while they were waiting for it to cure whatever they do, they went out. He also was a guy who drained the sewage, and so they went out to drain the sewage in the septic tanks, and Chuck wanted to see how it worked, so he at 77 got under the truck to see how it worked, and I was just glad it never broke, right? So but that's who he is. And his brother said about his father, and Chuck is the same way, he might have taken a little longer to get something done, but he only did it once. Never had to repeat it, never had to fix it. He only had to do it once. Amazing man.
Yeah.
It is very funny.
And that curiosity, that desire to understand how things worked was something that was throughout his entire career. I mean, that he wanted to know the systems of the aircraft inside and out before he flew them. So if something did go wrong, and let's face it, there were times when things went radically wrong, he would be able to use his knowledge of the systems to be able to save his butt.
Well, yes, and he wouldn't let anybody else do the maintenance on the X1 while he was flying it, because it was his butt. He said a few more choice words, but it was his butt in that seat. But even at 12, he took apart an engine. And his father came along and said, "Are you going to be able to put that back together, son?" And he said, "I took it apart, didn't I?" And he did. He put it all back together without any extra pieces lying around. So it started early. And they called him Aristotle as a kid because he was always thinking. Yeah. Okay. Always looking out the window and thinking.
There you go. Well, Henry has just typed in a question. He would like you to maybe talk about, and this is covered in the book as well, the General Yeager and the fact that he didn't become an astronaut, not necessarily because he didn't have a college degree, but that was not something that really appealed to him.
Well, here's the deal. So officially it's because he didn't have a college degree, but he was, you know, he's not good enough. He didn't have a college degree, but he's good enough to teach them all, right? Because he was head of the Aeronautical Research Pilot School. But the schools that he went to before that, they now give out master's degrees. So yeah, he could have, and I think if he had sort of pushed it, he could have. But you were just spamming a can. You weren't flying that aircraft, and he would have been bored up in space. So yeah, he wanted to fly. The only thing he said he wished he had done was have the ability to land the space shuttle. But remember what he said, and that's in the first book. He didn't want to have to wipe the monkey crap off the seat before he sat down. I mean, a reference to you're just sitting in that vehicle, not even an airplane, really.
Right.
So yeah, he could have been an astronaut. But David Scott said that, the astronaut. He's the one that first gave me a clue. No, he didn't want to. He had a brilliant flying career.
And he enjoyed the flying aspect and controlling the aircraft more than necessarily going to space. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And really, honestly, Steve, he actually did get into space, not outer space, but into space, because the idea of 50 miles being space was something that the International Fédérique Aéronautique decided because it was a safety and security thing. So all the countries owned up to 50 miles. Mm-hmm. So it's not really the scientific where space starts. So he saw the curvature of the Earth. He really is an astronaut, but he didn't care. Labels didn't affect him at all. So it doesn't. That's how I kind of tell that to people when they get upset, and I said, "No, it's okay. He's good." Yeah. Did he ever have a chance to fly like the X-15? Or
he didn't fly the X-15. No, okay. But he really admired Pete Knight, you know, who went 6.7 Mach, and then he landed. It was on fire. He's like, "Oh my gosh," running away from the airplane. So no, he didn't get to do that. I think he was already in Germany at that point. They were really afraid because from 45 to 54, 53, 54, he was a test pilot. And the congressional caucus came out and said, no, that's enough, because he was way beyond how the lifespan of a test pilot. In fact, I read something absurd, horrible, like over 20, maybe even 41 died in 1 month, test pilots at Edwards. That's a lot. Yeah. And they asked Jack Ridley, and Jack Ridley said, well, you're way past your lifespan. So they got him out of there in 54. And so then when he was there 61 to 66, they got him out of there again. But that was when Johnson turned over the space program to NASA. Right. And Chuck later said that was a gross error, because the Air Force probably would have been up in space with better aircraft if they had left it with the Air Force. But, you know, Johnson gave it to his cronies in Texas, and, you know, it's all money and all that. So.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, that's a story that is unto itself, how the Space Center got to be in Texas and everything else. But we'll save that for another day. And you mentioned Germany, and again, this is part of the Chuck Yeager story that, unless you've kind of read the books and learned about him, I mean, he spent quite a bit of time overseas, stationed in different countries, including, like you said, Germany.
Well, what was great about him, a lot of people will go get stationed in Germany, but they don't really get off campus. So they really don't see the locals. And Chuck would always go out and meet the locals, no matter where he was. When he was in Tonopah before the war, in Germany, he met the local Melsheimer, who was a wine grower. And he also owned, in Germany, there's no public space to hunt. So it's all privately held. So he met him. He was about the same age as Melsheimer's sons. And so he would go hunting with them, and he'd be a guide, so he'd be allowed to hunt. Had a great time. And Glennis hunted too. So they both had a great time. And they really liked Germany because they got to have a lot of people working for them in the house and taking care of things, and the kids. So they kind of like that.
Yeah. And that's an aspect, again, of the general. He really was an outdoorsman, very much from very, very young, hunting and fishing.
Well, he learned to hunt at age 6, and there's another statistic for you. They found out in World War II that 89%, 90% of the fighter pilots shot down about 90% no, excuse me, let me say that again. 11% of the fighter pilots shot down 90% of the enemy aircraft. And they said, what do they have something in common? And what they had in common is they grew up with a gun in their hand. They understood deflection shooting. Yeah, he would always, before school, he would go shoot squirrel, bring him home to mom to skin. And because he had shot him, he got to eat the choice part, the brains, squirrel's brains. And so when we went hunting with his grandson, and we're hunting quail and chukar and something else. Anyway, and he said to his grandson, shoot that squirrel, we'll have it for supper. And this grandson looked at him, you've lost, I don't think so. He's kidding me, right? And so Chuck said, no, that's the choicest part, the brains. And so I said, ask him and it's my favorite food. And I said, ask him when's the last time he had squirrel's brains. And so Kip, his grandson, said, and it was 1950. I said, yeah, it's favorite food. But he did shoot one and have a friend cook it for us, and so I tasted it. I mean, most of it tastes like chicken. And then he gave me the choice part, the brain, and I wasn't quite prepared. It was soft. And so I had to regroup in my taste buds. Wait, okay, this is soft. It actually was fine. It's whatever you flavor it with.
There you go. Lots of hot sauce.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. You know, my favorite time.
Go ahead.
My first time hunting with Chuck was hunting elk. And so we're in Montana. And what happened was the Safari Club International if you bought a lifetime membership, they do a raffle and you get to hunt with Chuck Yeager. So we went out there and we're driving around and we're looking for elk. And our guide just couldn't put us on any elk. But we drive, as we're going into lunch, there's a bunch of elk over 80 meters away and at 60 degrees. And there's a couple of hunters in front of us. And Chuck turned to them and said, are you going to shoot? And they said, no, look how far it is. I said, no. And so he said, well, I'm going to shoot. So I start to set up and they're, well, wait a minute. So they set up and I get out my camera. I've never hunted before. I don't know any of this stuff. So I get out my camera to shoot. Suddenly, like, bam. I said, whoa. And that goes right through just your whole body. And then I go to get positioned again and another bam. And so then I think they're done. The 2 shots, 2 hunters, we're done. No, the second hunter, he kept shooting. He shot another 4 times. And then Chuck shot it. We got tired of that. Shot his elk for him. But anyway, we go and we walk up this hill, and it's so steep, Steve, that my head is next to his rear, and we're next to each other. We're walking up this hill, and I can't believe this guy at 77 is just easily walking up this hill like nothing. And we get up there, and they start to get it. And Chuck takes a look at me turning green. I mean, I'm a city kid, and guns meant something else. And he looks around and he goes, Victoria, come look at this view. I mean, he doesn't want to carry me down, right? So we go over and look at the view, and then we do drag the elk down after it's been gutted, and it's so steep it goes faster than we do. So we let the boys handle it, and we walk on down. And then what happened was he had shot the one elk, but didn't see the tiny one, not tiny, yearling, behind it. So he shot 2 elk with 1 shot. And so I think this is great. Oh my gosh, that's a great feat, all that. So they had the Fish and Game because we only had 1 tag. And I'm like, it was so great. And they're like, shh, quiet, Victoria. Don't say that. But anyway, it worked out fine because, of course, Chuck didn't do that on purpose. Right. But 800 meters at over 60 degrees, somebody asked him, how high above that elk did he have to hold to actually hit it where he hit it? And he would hit it in the neck, which there's no margin of error. Most people hit it in the heart. And he hit it in the neck, and he just said, I held 11 feet above it. So amazing. And so when we went the next year, I didn't realize that was a big deal. So when there was one at 500 yards, and he said, nah, and then the guy was saying, but last year, and he said, nah, no. But he also was an ethical hunter. We were on another hunt, and they put us right on these elk. These were smaller elk, Thule elk, and it was only 100 yards away. And so the guide is waiting for him to shoot. He won't shoot. The elk runs a couple 100 yards away, still doesn't shoot. And I'm wondering what's going on because I don't know anything. And it gets to about 400 yards away, and then he shoots and drops it down. But he wasn't going to shoot something that close that easy. Give it a fighting chance.
There you go. Along with hunting, fishing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Beautiful fish.
That is a golden trout, Chuck's favorite fish of all time. So he would go for 55 years. He would hike up into the high Sierra and eat golden trout. And he'd have oatmeal for breakfast. And when we weren't near a lake, so the first 3 days you're getting to the lake, we would have beef jerky or elk jerky, and oatmeal and almonds and raisins. And then we'd have hot chocolate at night. And we had these things called attaboys. And what they were Werther's butterscotch, little, candies. And if you got up that hill that looked daunting with your 50-pound pack, he'd give you an attaboy. So it was quite fun those first 3 days. The first day I got a lot of blisters, but I didn't complain. I knew that there was nothing dangerous going on. They weren't getting infected or anything. We get to our first place to camp, and I take them off and think, oh, thank goodness. And he said, Victoria, could you go down to the stream and get some water? Which meant I had to put those boots back on. And so there was two other people with us, and one of them, thank goodness, said, I'll go do it. And I said, could I just gather wood right here, please? And Chuck took a look at my feet, and he was flabbergasted. I have blisters on blisters on blisters. He couldn't believe I hadn't complained. I thought, no, why? There's no benefit in complaining. Plus, he might kick me out and make me go home. So it was great going up and we would catch golden trout. The two other guys had trouble catching it, so Chuck would catch our dinner for us. And he taught me how to fish that trip. So it was pretty fun. It was fun. And
you were saying it not just but not just casting, but fly fishing was his passion.
Yes, and he always said you can't really teach fly fishing. You have to learn it on your own. So he brought me a spinning rod. So I was throwing out there and reeling it in. It was skipping along the top, and he'd say, slow it down. And so it took me a while to figure that out. So then I slow it down, and the tip goes down. And I said, I got a fish. And he said, no, you that's a rock. I said, no, it's a fish. Come on, it's bending. And he said, no, it's a rock. Can't you tell the difference between a fish and a rock? Like, okay. And I'm starting to think of scientific explanations and, a fish is alive, a rock. And he said, a fish wiggles. And as he would tell the story, she threw the rod down and stomped off. That's not quite what happened, but it was funny. I see he started, pardon?
It makes for a good story.
Exactly. And then he started teaching me the fly fishing. And of course, I caught everything but a fish. I caught the tree behind me. But we had a guide who was very patiently taking it off for me and helping me. So that was nice. This one is a salmon, a huge salmon that Chuck actually caught, obviously, because he's got the rod. But this is on the Sayou River. Every cast, we would catch a fish. And so the two of us had a fish on, and he would put it over his shoulder and walk because they were so big. And it was just fun. Just the two of us. Nobody would come out because that day it was raining. It's like, seriously, the fish don't know it's raining. It's wet. They're wet. It's fun.
Very good. And
that guide was really great.
Yeah, you spent a lot of time in Africa. First of all, before you met the general, and then obviously together, doing some hunting and touring as well.
Well, he taught me how to hunt. He taught me how to shoot. He would take me to the shooting range. And this one, you can see he's pointing to himself, being very cheeky. But I shot that one. But amazing. This is a springbok. So then it was his turn. We were culling springbok and feeding the tribes. And they would bounce really high. I think they're the highest jumping for their size. But anyway, you couldn't see it through the grass. It jumped. He shot it. It was down. It was amazing. But anyway, we fed the tribes nearby, and that was really satisfying. Honestly, he wouldn't just go for trophies. This was great. This was hunting pigs that were a nuisance on a ranch in Texas. And again, it fed all the poor folks around. And I was silly. Well, I said I was the spotter, and I'm pretty good at that, actually. And I said, and the pilot was a Vietnam vet, really good. Even Chuck said he paced the pigs that Chuck didn't even have to deflection shoot. He didn't have to shoot ahead of them. He could just shoot it. So I said, wow, this is like war. And Chuck said, no, the pigs aren't shooting back at you. And I thought, okay, I'm really stupid. I'm with two people that have risked their lives in war, and I'm sitting here thinking it's a game. How silly am I? But they were very gracious about it. It was very sweet of them. It was fun, very fun.
Yeah.
That's a wildebeest. And this is so funny. After he shot this, they had to cook it. It was old. really old. I think it was one of those, if you blew on it, it would fall down. But he shot in the neck. And actually, the first time he shot these in the neck, they couldn't believe it because they have, African animals have very thick skin. Usually it takes a couple of shots. But Chuck, one shot, and they're like, how old is he? Let me see that gun. But anyway, we gave the meat to the school, and they cooked it for days, which they had to tenderize it. And it was so cute because this little girl, I mean, this little black girl, gorgeous, comes up and puts her hand in his. I'd like to go home with you. You're feeding me. It was so cute. They're all cute, and they sang for us. It was beautiful.
Very good. Fred had a question here, and I don't remember this in the book, but he was a C-5 flight engineer when he was in the Air Force and had a chance to fly with General Yeager. Do you remember him ever talking about C-5? Flying a C-5?
Sure. Steve, he flew 361 different makes and models of military aircraft all over the world. So I know the ones he didn't fly. He didn't fly the X-15, and he didn't fly the A-10. And there's only one airplane he said he didn't like, absolutely didn't like, and that was the Stearman. And if you've ever flown a Stearman, it is really hard to see. It's very hard to see when you're landing. It's really hard. I've flown it. It's I mean, not alone, but it's hard.
Well,
anyway, that's the one he didn't like. But
well, that would have been one of his early trainers in flight school.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Instead, he went to a BT-13, I think. 13, yeah. And actually, with the big planes like the C-5, so we were on a C-141 in Afghanistan, and we had flown into Kandahar. We had flown into first Kuwait, and then we didn't have much sleep, and then we had no sleep, and we flew into Kandahar. So we hadn't slept in about 33 hours. And then we weren't supposed to be in Kandahar. We were supposed to be in Kabul. So our minder, thank goodness, had all the phone numbers, and they finally got us on another plane 4 hours later. And we're on this plane, and Chuck is sitting. It was a C-141. He's sitting in the navigator seat. We have a Air National Guard pilot, Air National Guard co-pilot, and I'm on the back bench. And when we take off, he says, "Where are we going?" And they look at each other like, "Oh, this old man, he's not all here or whatever." And I saw that look, and you know me, I came out of my shoes about to bonk their heads together. I said, "Look, nobody told us where we were going. They said we were going to Kabul. You don't spell it Kandahar. Where are we going now? We figure, okay, Mazi Sharif. Sorry, sir. Sorry, ma'am. Sorry, sir. Okay." So 20 minutes later, Chuck calls out, "Brake!" And they said, "What?" He said, "Brake." And they said, "Which way?" Anyway, it's coming right at you. So this big old cargo or whatever kind of plane, does a big old wing over. There's guys in the back down below. I hope they were strapped in. And just as we're going straight and level again, a plane right where we were is going the other direction. And 20 minutes later, when everybody's calmed down, Chuck was calm the whole time. I was calm because Chuck was there. He said, "Don't you guys look out the window? I mean, we're in a no radar zone. It's ridiculous." I said, "I don't care how little sleep you've had. You're going to be sitting in that seat every time we fly here." Yeah. Then we landed, having not slept for about 40 hours at this point. The commander at Mazi Sharif said, "I know you haven't. Could you please just talk to our guys just for a little bit? They've been waiting." And so we took a quick nap, 20-minute nap, and then he got up and spoke for an hour. And the young kids that were with us he called them pot-smoking guitar players. They weren't. They were nice young men, but they didn't think anybody would want to see Chuck Yeager, but they were wrong. So they got these musicians, and when they asked him, Chuck, if he would not mind staying up longer, they were saying in the background, "No, no, no, no." And of course he did. So then they had to, these 35-year-olds. It was a great life with him.
Yeah. Speaking of musicians, he was a big fan of the Oak Ridge Boys, and they were fans of his as well.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. He would introduce them. It was very fun. He would get out there and say Bonsing Joe Bonzel, and he flew William Lee Golden with the long beard and the long gray hair, and he took him in the Husky, which you've seen, the tail dragger, right, at Baron Hilton's ranch. And when Chuck introduced him, he said, "We look like a flying squirrel with his beard out the window and his hair out the window." William Lee was really a terrific person. He always took advantage of what was put in front of him. So he came out to Barron's Ranch, and he got to meet Neil Armstrong and hang out with Chuck Yeager. It was fun. Very fun.
Definitely was. And you mentioned Baron Hilton. That's a long-standing friendship between the two?
Yes. Yes, Barron would take him fishing on his boat. It was great. They'd pick him up in Marysville, take him up to Alaska, or pick him up, or we'd fly down to LA, and he'd take us to Cabo San Lucas. And one year, Barron said, "Now you are getting off at Cabo, right?" Meaning I wasn't going to continue with them to Socorro, where they would, in Mexico, where they get on the boat, and it had the best tuna fishing. In fact, one time they fished with Vicente Fox. It was pretty fun. So they came back with a lot of fish both times. But we also would go to the ranch where Barron had, I don't know how many, 6 or 7 different types of aircraft. So I was lucky. I got to fly them all with a flight instructor. Chuck never flew any of Barron's without the flight instructor either, because he was smart. A couple of Barron's guests actually crashed his planes, and that's just expensive. That's just, we didn't want to do that. So yeah, but it was really fun, very fun.
Well, speaking of flying, in the book, you talk about learning how to fly yourself, and some interesting experiences there, of course, because you know, I mean, how intimidating was that for your flight instructors, knowing that the guy who was picking you up from the airport was Chuck Yeager?
Right. Well, I went to Chuck. You know, the first license you get is probably the most dangerous, because the instructor doesn't know when to take over or let you make a mistake that you learn from which you learn. So he wasn't keen on, and we also had seen a bunch of CFIs, including Baron Hilton's pilot, who actually unfortunately killed himself in an airplane just recently. So I was getting these ad hoc lessons, and that guy wanted to solo me, and I said, well, what do I do if the engine quits? He goes, oh, we haven't taught you emergency procedures. Well, that'd be kind of good to know before I solo, right? So he wasn't really keen on it, but I thought I got to get a real flight instructor that concentrates on me the whole, you know, each time. And I think it'd really be stupid if I outlived Chuck and I didn't know how to fly. So I went to him and I said, I've got to learn how to fly, and I want you to support me in this. And bless his heart, he did. And we went through 4 or 5 certified flight instructors before we alighted on one that was adequate. Not great, but adequate. Because Chuck could correct him as I drove home. Because I'm like Chuck. I want to know why. I want to know the details why. Don't just tell me it goes 70 when you're past the numbers. Why am I going 70 past the numbers? And that's not, you know this, that's not always going to be the case that you want to do that. So it was great. And then there was one time that he corrected in front of the guy. The guy, I was about to get my check ride, but I couldn't do a short field landing. My first landing with the instructor, I had done a perfect short field landing, my only one ever probably. But anyway, so Chuck said, you have her coming in on final at 3 or 4 knots too fast. And the guy said, how does he know that? I mean, for you, those of you who aren't pilots, that's like saying you're going 5 miles an hour faster than 65 miles an hour without a radar or anything. And I said, let me introduce you my husband, Chuck Yeager. I mean, of course he knows. And he said he was absolutely right. So I was grateful that he was there. Because here's the other thing, Steve. There's one time we're flying where he flew you over Tahoe. We're flying over a ridge, and we drop a significant amount. I mean, really a significant amount. And I'm thinking, whoo. And I was really grateful that Chuck was at the controls. And so we fly along, and Chuck says a few minutes later, well, that was quite a drop. Yeah. And I said, well, how much of quite a drop was that? And he said, oh, about 10 feet or so. Like, yeah, that was quite a drop. But the other time, the wind picked us up and started flying us into the trees. And I'm thinking, oh, is this going to hurt? And then he cobs it. We go faster towards the trees. I'm thinking, oh, this is going to probably hurt a little bit more. But as you know, and his pilots know, he's gaining control of the aircraft, and he brought it back and landed it beautifully. So we're driving home. About 45 minutes later, he said, well, I ran out of aileron. And for non-pilots, that's turning ability. So it was, okay, good to know. But honestly, Steve, you know, when you're about to crash into something, you want to pull the brakes. You're going to pull the power. Is your natural instinct. But now I know what to do that I wouldn't have necessarily known before. Just great. We got into a lot of situations like that. Very lucky. A lot of these stories are in the book. There's a story in there about doing some formation flying as well. It is some of the most demanding flying that you can do. I actually became a pretty good formation flyer, but the first time we're up in this tail dragger, and there's another one, I think it's a 152, and we're on his wing. So Chuck sets me up perfectly. And so he said, keep the edge of the wing on the spinner. Okay. So I do that. And he said, you're out of position. I said, well, I got the wingtip on the spinner. And he said, yeah, but you're 5 miles out. So he puts me back in position again. You know, Steve, if I had been smarter, like a few years later, I would have said, well, he said, give me room. He waggled his wing. He waggled his tail. That means, you know, go out. So I'd say that now just to come back at him. But anyway, so he puts me back in. And I said, he's all over the place altitude-wise. Well, he wasn't. I was all over the place trying to find. So my first was, you know, a little bit challenging. But because I'd been a sailor, I understood about little movements. And I gradually got it. And so it was very fun to fly formation. I think from getting I have a record too, from getting my license to being in an air show, flying formation with Chuck Yeager. So that was fun.
Cool. About how many hours of flight time do you have now?
You know, I probably have a few thousand a couple thousand probably. Okay. I probably had 1,000 before I actually got my license. So I'm exaggerating. Probably about 600 before I got my license.
Okay.
Because I was learning when I was 21, and I said, how do you get into a spin? How do you get out? I like to be safety conscious. And so she said, you get into a spin, you die. I said, okay, how do you get into a spin so I can prevent it? And she said, she wouldn't tell me. So there I was 20 years later. I meet the guy, that's his job, getting in and out of spins. So I did, about a couple years later, I did about 4 spins, and the flight instructor was like, do you realize you just did 4 spins? I said, well, you told me to. You know, do a spin, get out of it, do a spin. And he said, well, most people are done after 1 or 2. I said, oh, okay. But I wasn't, he was telling me what to do. I was fine. Anyway, I don't want to do spins. I'm not an aerobatic pilot. Nothing about that entices me at all. So, but I know how not to get into a spin.
There you go. Henry is asking, did General Yeager talk about his experiences with the film The Right Stuff? You know, being a technical consultant with the film?
Absolutely. This is the coolest thing. In 2003, they had the 20th anniversary, and they had a big premiere. And so we went to it, and there he was with Barbara Hershey, and just looking great, and she's looking great. And he looks over at me with this sheepish grin, going, hee hee, you know, I'm with Barbara Hershey. I was like, yeah, good for him. That's great. And we were watching the movie, and about, you know, every few minutes he'd say OBS, but he'd say the whole word, of course. And so I got the real lowdown watching it with him. We were behind Gordon Cooper. We were next to a guy who was commandant of Edwards, and he said, without Chuck Yeager, we couldn't have won a war. It's 2003. We couldn't have won a war in 10 days or 11 days. And I said, okay, connect the dots for me there. But as you know, it was because we kept ahead of all the other countries, because people were willing to risk their neck, like Chuck Yeager, to keep us ahead. And breaking the sound barrier is one of 2 of the tippy-top accomplishments. First powered flight by the Wright brothers and breaking the sound barrier. There's a lot of close seconds, but those are the 2 major ones. So yeah, yes, he did talk about it. He said that Sam Shepard did a great job, which he did. Mm-hmm. And he also said that the portrayal of the astronauts was accurate, arrogant, getting too much stuff. And here these guys were breaking their necks and getting nothing. I mean, Chuck had to go, Glennis had to have her baby off of Edwards, or it was Muroc at the time, because they were TDY, temporary duty. So she couldn't go to the BX, she couldn't do anything. And these guys are getting free houses. And we're sitting in a camp, you know. But anyway, so he said, yes, their arrogance and all that was very well portrayed. And actually, they all adored Chuck, too. So I met many of them that were still alive, and they adored Chuck. But he also said that Gus Grissom was given a raw deal. And it's unfortunate that the Right Stuff didn't give. He also, this is the other thing a lot of people don't know, they asked him to reenact that NF-104 incident that he had for the movie. And he said, whoever does that is going to augur in no. And so they got somebody else to do it, and he augured in. So they got their shot, but not good. So yeah, he talked about it a bit, but he had fun because he always makes fun. What was great is Dennis Quaid said he treated us like, you know, our fun uncle. And he took them each flying. And Barbara Hershey and Sam Shepard did not fly. And so, but he did fly with Chuck. And he talked with Barbara Hershey, and they said, well, you know, if we augur in, we're auguring in with the best pilot in the world. So, okay. So, and when they met, Sam Shepard wouldn't do the movie. So Phil Kaufman, the director and writer, brought Chuck to meet Sam. Or I don't know where they met. But anyway, they were like 2 alpha males circling. And Chuck just turned on his charm. And his charm was genuine. It wasn't a fake you know. And so they just finally bonded, and Sam said, "Okay, I'll play him."
Awesome.
So yeah, he talked a lot about the right stuff. Very fun.
Good. Any thoughts of doing some sort of biographical movie or something?
Oh yeah, I want to do a series. Yeah, the book was optioned often, but the scripts were really terrible. A lot of them were boys and their toys. They didn't have Chuck's character, which really makes it different and stand out. So we stopped letting anybody option it. Well, we don't have the rights, but we stopped anybody optioning Chuck's life story, and we started filming for a documentary. And I wanted it to be a series of documentaries, if I'm lucky, and go for the first one, 0 through World War II. And we've done the filming. I've written the outline for the script, and so I just need to put it together as you can imagine, for the first few years after Chuck died. Well, it hasn't been that many. I just didn't want to watch so much footage of him. Right. It was too much, but I think I'm getting ready to do that, and I think it'll be really exciting, actually. And I'm looking. The problem with doing a major motion picture is that you have to sell your life story, and they can do what they want.
Right.
And so there's a woman who had just done a lesbian serial killer, and Chuck said, and he said, "Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think that would be the right person doing my movie. I don't want to be portrayed as a lesbian serial. No." Yep. And then there were a lot of people who wanted to play him, like Leonardo DiCaprio and Tom Cruise and a bunch of people, but they just weren't the right person. They're good actors, not the right person.
Yeah.
So it's been an odyssey and fun.
Good. What are some of your favorite stories that are in that book?
I was going to ask you that. That's not fair.
I know.
Actually,
I get to you first.
If you asked me 5 minutes from now, it'd be different. But right now, it's the bull racing. Oh my gosh, how many bull races have you been to?
Yeah.
So in Pakistan, they have this field. Obviously, you can see that. And as you can see, the guy is standing on something. What it is like an upside down trash can lid without the handle. And he's got a whip, and he's got the harness. And most time, and you have to get all the way down that piece of land. I wouldn't call it a runway. It could be a runway, actually. You have to get all the way down there, and you don't even have to be on the trash can lid. They can do it on their own. But most of the time, they want to go home. So they're turning, and they're left or right. One time, they went right into the judges jumped before they hit them. So I guess, that's their comment on the judges. There was another time where we're sitting there. So we were in a truck, and Prince Malik Mohammed Khan, whose guest we were, and I are up on top of the truck with 2 of his guards, and Chuck's down in the cab. And I've got a cup of tea and my pinky up, right, because it's very civilized. I'm drinking tea, and these bulls, the 2, comes running at us. And I have my camera and my tea, and I'm thinking, oh, okay. I put the tea down very carefully, and I'm thinking I'll take a picture, and I'll hold on. And they're coming, they're huge. I'm like, okay, I'll put the camera down, I'm good. And I hold on for dear life. And then they veered, and I thought, oh, you coward, Victoria, you should have stayed and taken that picture. But I got it pretty close. That was really, really, I was the only female, 10,000 men. And of course, I'm with the prince, so I'm protected. And all the people would come up to him because, see, it's almost like the serfs during the medieval times in England. They would pay him for renting their land and 10% of their wheat. His grandfather had sent him to Oxford to study law to protect himself from the government. His ancestor was the right-hand man of Alexander the Great, so they owned lots of land. But when they partitioned India and Pakistan, they had to move to Pakistan, so they lost a lot of land. But anyway, so he had this big, and he would be in parliament in Pakistan. And he said, "What are you doing for the people?" And they would do nothing for the people. So he decided, just go home. He'll take care of his people, and he does. And they have these big festivals like this, and I mean, they had all this food, like street food, which, needless to say, I didn't try any of it. And Prince Malik said, "I think you should go try these," when they were the littler bulls. And so I thought about it, and I had my riding gear not with me, and then I thought, no, a hospital is about 4 hours away, and that's Islamabad. I don't know how good. No, I don't think so. I'll be okay. And Chuck lots of times would wait until I made a decision, and then he'd weigh in if it was the wrong decision. Yep. I don't think he would have let me. But anyway, this is the palace where Prince Malik we were guests, and it's huge, and it's beautiful. Princess Diana stayed there before us, of course.
Yep.
And there's Chuck right there. You can see the size of it, just hanging out, looking at the scenery. It was fun because inside, enclosed in the palace grounds. Oh, this is court. This is court for Pakistan. So Prince Malik is on the left there, and while he would, all the subjects would come and they'd air out their grievances or their disputes, and he would chop wood and make a decision. And at one point, there were two guys that walked away, and they looked really sour-faced. And I said, "What happened?" And he said, "Well, they needed water for their crops, and they wanted to use some from my lake." And I said, "Sure, you can use some." I said, "Well, they didn't seem too happy about that." And he said, "Oh, that's Pakistani, so don't worry about them." Okay. But it was fun. And these guys, his guards, all these, not the two in the middle, but the other guys around him were his guards, and they had fought in the Pakistan-India War, and they revered Chuck. General Yeager, they just were so thrilled that he was there, and nothing was going to happen to us. Nobody was going to harm us. Fantastic. In fact, when I rode horses with Prince Malik every morning for a couple hours out in the villages, and they'd come up and they grab his hand and they bow to him, and he was wearing a green vest, and he wanted me to wear a turban instead of my helmet, and Chuck said, "No, you're wearing that helmet. It's state of the art for protection," which I think that's how you should spend your money. And my vest, which was protective, was also green, so it looked like I was part of the entourage. It was pretty fun. So I started telling. So the horseback riding, Chuck saw, I get on this horse, and they watched me ride around inside the grounds, and this horse just took off like a bat out of hell and goes round and round. And there's one spot where you're turning, and there's a big well near where the tree is. And I'm thinking, just don't fall, just don't trip, please don't trip, please, please. And there's no way I can control this horse. And I'm thinking, how am I going to stop? And I thought they were gardeners. They were his guards, ready to catch me if something happened, all around this mile track, actually. And then the horse stopped suddenly. I stayed on, but I didn't do anything. It had to poop. So, but it was fun, and very fun.
And of course, you've got the shot of you having tea.
Having tea, being civilized, yes. To the right was the cab where Chuck was sitting. Yeah. Very fun.
You have had
and Prince Malik, when he was in America, I think he was at Disneyland once, and they kept coming up to him thinking he was Aladdin. Oh. He's always dressed in traditional garb.
Yep.
Very fun.
You've had some incredible adventures with General Yeager. You went to South Africa.
Oh yeah, this is Table Mountain in Cape Town. Yes, we did. This was actually right when Nelson Mandela wasn't doing so well. So, and whenever you go to meet someone like that, there's always an entourage, and he just wanted to be with his family. So we didn't get to meet him, but we got to meet his right-hand man, Tokyo Sakwali, who's is an amazing man. In fact, I was sitting to Chuck's left, and they sat him to Chuck's right. And I knew he must be someone of stature, but I had no clue who he was. So I thought, well, ask something innocuous. I said, "Do you have any children?" He said, "Yes, but I had them late because I was in prison for 15 years. How many people in America would say that, right? So I said, "Okay." And then he explained that he was against apartheid, and so they put him in prison. And so he got to learn a lot from Nelson Mandela. And they both together forged that forgiveness and let's unite the country. So it's and then he got out sooner than Nelson Mandela did, and was in the government right after when Nelson took over. And really good guy. He's an honorary colonel, really honored Chuck, and just a vivacious, happy guy. Really amazing when you've been in prison for 15 years. So yeah, we had a great time. That was fun. This is the National Memorial Day Parade in Washington, D.C. It was very hot. That was pretty funny because so he's in the parade. They asked if I wanted to be in the car with him. I was in the car with him once, and I realized that everybody on my side, I really had to duck. They wanted to see him, and I don't blame them. I wanted to see him. So I never did it again. I always stayed outside. Well, I was following him trying to take pictures, and I was blocked by this woman. She said, "You can't go there. You have to be behind the gate." And I said, "Well, I'm Mrs. Chuck Yeager." And this other huge woman comes and blocks me. And she said, she thinks she's Mrs. Chuck Yeager. So then finally my minder comes along. He's talking to the guy on the side. And I said, "Could you please speak up?" And so he says something, and they say, "Yes, she is Mrs. Yeager." And I turn around, and they've all disappeared. And I have a free run to go get a picture of Chuck. It was hilarious. I didn't get mad. You know, they're doing their job.
Yes.
I get it. They're protecting Chuck.
And of course, he had a lot of interactions at the Indy 500. I knew he had done the pace car in the 80s, but I didn't realize that he was a pretty frequent visitor at Indy.
He was. They loved him there. There was a sheriff there, Sheriff McAtee, who really treated him and then treated us very well. This is Danica Patrick, one of the first females and very successful. But I'll never forget, on the Thursday before, they take VIPs and they'll put you in a car and a driver will take you around. And so I got to do that. And he was first, of course, and he went around and then he gets out. And I was told later, while I was having my little trip around, which was a lot of G's to the side, and I thought, I hope this isn't the way I'm going to go. This is okay. But she apparently had come up to him from behind. Now, never go up to somebody who's been in war from behind. They'll knock you down and put their foot on your throat. And remember, he was escaping Germans too, evading Germans. In any case, she comes up from behind. She has a very deep voice. She said, "I want a picture with you." And he turned around and he was about to do whatever, but Sheriff McAtee stepped in and said, "That's not how you address General Yeager." and then smoothed it out. I was like, okay. She was pretty fun. She was, but you had to be that focused to be that good. So
sure,
that was fun. That's San Diego. That's Johnny Rutherford, who won a few Indy 500. Very good race car driver. And then what happened was Patrick Dempsey was the pace car guy, and they really do it out about 10 years. But that's Patrick McDreamy. Yep. And they wanted Chuck to drive, so they had him pace the pace car. So he was ahead of the pace car for that year. And then Patrick, his people came up to me and he said, "Would General Yeager like to come meet Patrick Dempsey?" And I was sure Chuck didn't have any clue who he was. And I said, no, would Patrick Dempsey like to meet General Chuck Yeager? So they went over to Patrick Dempsey, and bless his heart, he was a gentleman. He came on over and he introduced himself. And because he did everything right, you know, Chuck, if you're polite and a gentleman and you shake his hand, he's good. And so Chuck, they were talking a little bit, and Chuck said, "What, are you a race car driver?" And Patrick sort of chuckled. He said, No, sir, I'm an actor." It was so cute. It's great. That's another when he was doing the pace car.
Yep.
Looking good.
88.
And again, another pace car. This is before my time, 1985 and 87.
Yep.
But he didn't change. I mean, he looked the same 20 years later, right?
Yeah, timeless. And one of our viewers is asking this question, and I can actually answer it. Did General Yeager discuss his exploits flying the P-51 with Bud Anderson? And was fortunate enough to hear he and Bud talk about their exploits with the 357th a number of times at Oshkosh, and I'm sure you've heard stories as well.
Well, I'd rather hear you tell it, Steve, because you knew him longer than I did. Actually, I'm a little jealous.
Well,
but
you
no,
know,
go ahead.
Go ahead.
Chuck and one of the most interesting later is that Andy was the scheduler, and it was the last flight, and so Chuck said, "Schedule us together." And so they were the spares, and they didn't have to go fight. So they just they didn't go back to the base. They still went into Europe, and they went, and Chuck showed him where he'd been shot down and all these places. They went into Switzerland, and they dropped their tanks, and they each shot at each other's tanks, and then they came back. And because the maintenance guys saw that they had obviously shot their guns, they said, "How many did you get? How many did you get?" Well, apparently the group had shot down 57. Yep. And so they said, "Oh, we missed the biggest battle of the war." And of course, Chuck, he says that, and then he says, "Of course, I also missed being shot down again." So he was okay with it. But yeah, they really enjoyed flying together. Both of them had excellent eyesight. So they were the ones that could see the enemy long before the enemy could see them. And this is something you should know, Stephen, all the pilots should know, and actually anybody, exercise your eyes. Chuck would look out 50 miles on the ground when he was flying the P-51 during World War II. Then he'd bring it up into air, and he let his eyes focus back to normal, which is 20 feet. And in that, he could see whether there was an enemy aircraft. But he would lead the flight because of his eyesight. But he's still a flight officer. And why? Because he'd been court-martialed way back in Tonopah. Thank goodness there wasn't an internet. And so Jimmy Doolittle came out and he said, "What's the story on you?" He said, "Well," and tells him about the court-martial, which was a silly thing. He was shooting out to the desert, showing his fellow airmen how it works. And some rancher said he shot his horse, which may or may not be true that the horse was shot. But anyway, so Jimmy Doolittle wipes it out and promotes him twice in 4 months. Anyway, even when Chuck was a spare and had to fill in when he was shot down, he was the first one to see the Germans, not the flight leader.
Yeah.
So the flight leader called break, and then Chuck's the leader, and he gets 3 shots on his airplane. And as you know, he gets hit in the radiator, which is the vulnerable point of the P-51. But he said he got some good shots off on them. And you've been in a P-51, right? So I was in a static one the first time. I got to fly with him later, but the first time again and I'm having trouble getting out. And I said to him, "How did you get out when you were shot down?" And he said, "I didn't have to. It was falling in pieces all apart all around me. I didn't have to." So yeah, there were a lot of stories, but you probably have some really good ones too. You're certainly welcome to join in here.
Oh yeah. Well, that leads into this, which is one of my favorites, and that is, I was privileged enough to work with you and General Yeager with the EIA Young Eagles program, and really seeing a different side of him. So when you'd see him do a forum or a talk, whether it was by himself with Bud Anderson, maybe Bob Hoover, whatever, he was, very, I don't want to say stiff, because that's not the word I'm looking for, but he was very much the military person. He was very, stand up straight, gave the story, maybe embellished a little bit, whatever, got some laughs from folks, and enjoyed telling those stories and relating that. But then when he would go with the Young Eagles program, and especially when he was the chairman of the program, he enjoyed taking the kids from Make-A-Wish, who would come out to the show, and they get VIP treatment, and they get to ride in the Ford Tri-Motor, and they get to ride with Chuck Yeager, and you can see, they're relatively young, but we'd kind of explain who Chuck Yeager was, and they would go out and fly, and he would sit in the left seat of the Tri-Motor and bring the kids up, and they let them take the wheel and go back and forth. And and just seeing that side of him, and just seeing him just kind of melt and just welcome these kids and just want them to have the best possible experience. And I think it's in the book where he talks, you talk about him with one of the kids who was flying and could barely see over the steering wheel, couldn't really see out, and Chuck's like, push forward and we'll go down. And the kid pushes forward with all his might, and then pull back, we'll go up. And the kid pulls back. And Chuck is having a great time while everybody in the back is going up and down, but down. But it was such a wonderful experience to see that, to be a part of it, and just to see the care that he had, and the absolute compassion that he had for not only the Make-A-Wish kids, but all the Young Eagles that he flew through the years. So it was, that's my favorite part of the book.
Well, I mean, he adored you. You two are good friends, and really the two of you heading that program really got it to, I always say they got way more than 1 million by December 17, 2003. I always say over 1.2 million, because apparently there wasn't great good bookkeeping in the beginning, but the two of you and all the pilots that helped, but your leadership with Chuck's leadership, it was outstanding. Congratulations and kudos to you.
Thanks. It was
really great.
A very fun time, and speaking of time, we are just about out of time, and we've got all the questions answered that our audience has given us tonight, and thank you for sending your questions in. Always glad to pass those along. And Victoria, maybe just in the minute or so we've got left, any final thoughts?
Well, I'm imploring everybody who's listening, let's keep General Yeager's legacy alive. And you're all part of Team Yeager, so let's do that. He was an amazing man personally. He obviously risked his life a lot to help to keep us advanced, and privately he was a very generous guy. I mean, he spent a lot of time doing charity and things that people really don't know about. But he didn't blow his own horn. It wasn't about him. It was about helping people. Yeah. And so I'm just very, very grateful that I met him. I mean, just the perfect. As I said this before, I didn't know marriage could be so great, and it was. And so I learned so much, and every day I go, oh, that's because of Chuck. Thank you. Yeah. So I really appreciate it. I didn't tell you the tent pegging story. Maybe next time.
There we go. If someone's like to buy the copy of the book, where can they do that?
They can go to therightstuffstore.com. Okay. Or they can come to the various events. We have a big event in West Virginia, General Chuck Yeager Aviation Day. There'll be Young Eagles flights, Girls in Aviation, flight simulators, remote control models that you can fly, that they'll let you fly. So yeah, it's a fun book, but rightstuffstore.com.
Excellent. Victoria, thank you so much for sharing some memories of your time with General Yeager. We certainly appreciate it, and best of luck to you in the future.
Thank you, Steve. It's great visiting with you. Thanks.
Yeah. And thank you for watching tonight. We appreciate you being a part of our loyal audience. And if you haven't already done so, please like, share, and subscribe. And make sure you click that bell icon if you're on YouTube, and you'll get notifications when our new episodes go live. If you have any thoughts about this program or any of the other ones, please drop Leah Block an email at media@cafhq.org. And for the Commemorative Air Force, I'm Steve Buss. Have a great night.